given that I have 5, 6, 7, some people even say 10 minutes to do this is going to go kind of quick. So just bear with me. We'll go real fast, fill in the blanks. North Americans, such as myself, we're basically sort of wallowing gluttonous hogs and we're eating all sorts of stuff. One of the biggest levers that we have in the developed world for changing the impact that we have on the planet is changing the way that we live in cities. We're already an urban planet. That's especially true in the developed world. And people who live in cities in the developed world tend to be very prosperous and thus use a lot of stuff. If we can change the dynamic by, first of all, creating cities that are denser and more livable. Here, for example, is Vancouver, which if you haven't been there, you ought to go for a visit. It's a fabulous city. And they are doing density, new density, better than probably anybody else on the planet right now. They're actually managing to talk North Americans out of driving cars, which is a pretty great thing. So you have density, you also have growth management. You leave aside what is natural to be natural. You can start doing things like transit systems that actually work to transport people in effective and reasonably comfortable manners, right? You can also start to change what you build. This is the Beddington Zero Energy Development in London, which is one of the greenest buildings in the world. It's a fabulous place. We're able to now build buildings that generate all their own electricity, that recycle much of their water, that are much more comfortable than standard buildings, use all natural light, et cetera, and over time, cost less. One of the things that you can do is, as information technologies develop, you can start to have smart places. You can start to know where things are. When you know where things are, it becomes easier to share them. When you share them, you end up using less. So one great example is car share clubs, which are really starting to take off in the US, have already taken off in many places in Europe, and are a great example. If you're somebody who drives one day a week, do you really need your own car? Another thing that information technology lets us do is start figuring out how to use less stuff by knowing and by monitoring the amount we're actually using. So here's a power cord which glows brighter the more energy that you use, which I think is a pretty cool concept, although I think it ought to work the other way around, that it gets brighter the more you don't use. But there may even be a simpler approach. We could just relabel things. This light switch that reads on the one hand flash floods and on the other hand off. How we build things can change as well. This is a biomorphic building. It takes its inspiration in form from life. Many of these buildings are incredibly beautiful and also much more effective. This is an example of biomimicry, which is something we're really starting to look at a lot more for. In this case, you have a shell design which was used to create a new kind of exhaust fan, which is greatly more effective. There's a lot of this stuff happening. It's really pretty remarkable. I encourage you to look on World Changing if you're into it. We're starting to cover this more and more. There's also neobiological design, where more and more we are actually using life itself and the processes of life to become part of our industry. So this, for example, is hydrogen-generating algae. So we have a model in potential, an emerging model that we're looking for of how to take the cities most of us live in and turn them into bright green cities. But unfortunately, most of the people on the planet don't live in the cities we live in. They live in the emerging megacities of the developing world. And there's a statistic I often like to use, which is that we're adding a city of Seattle every 4 days, a city the size of Seattle, to the planet every 4 days. I was giving a talk about 2 months ago, and this guy who'd done some work with the UN came up to me and was really flustered, and he said, look, you've got that totally wrong. It's totally wrong. It's every 7 days. So we're adding a city the size of Seattle every 7 days, and most of those cities look more like this than the city that you or I live in. Most of those cities are growing incredibly quickly. They don't have existing infrastructure. They have enormous numbers of people who are struggling with poverty and enormous numbers of people who are trying to figure out how to do things in new ways, right? So what do we need in order to make a developing nation megacities into bright green megacities? Cell phones. Right? All throughout the developing world, people are going directly to cell phones, skipping the whole landline stage. If there are landlines in many developing world cities, they're usually pretty crappy systems that break down a lot and cost enormous amounts of money. Right? The second thing is tools for collaboration, be they systems of collaboration or intellectual property systems which encourage collaboration. Right? This is a telecentro in Sao Paulo. This is a pretty remarkable program using free and open source software, cheap sort of hacked together machines and basically sort of abandoned buildings, has put together a bunch of community centers where people can come in, get high-speed internet access, learn computer programming skills for free. And 250,000 people every year use these now in Sao Paulo. And those 250,000 people are some of the poorest people in Sao Paulo. These are people who've just been visited by the Internet Bookmobile in Uganda and who are waving their first books in the air. Another world is possible is sort of the big motto of the anti-globalization movement, right? We tweak that a lot. We talk about how another world isn't just possible, another world's here. That it's not just that we have to sort of imagine there being a different, vague possibility out there, but we need to start acting a little bit more on that possibility. We need to start doing things like Lula, president of Brazil here. How many people knew of Lula before today? Okay, so, well, much, much better than the average crowd, I can tell you that. So Lula, he's full of problems, full of contradictions, but one of the things that he's doing is he is putting forward an idea of how we engage in international relations that completely shifts the balance from the standard sort of north-south dialogue into a whole new way of global collaboration. I would keep your eye on this fella. Another example of this sort of second superpower thing is the rise of these games that are what we call serious play. We're looking a lot at this. This is spreading everywhere. This is from A Force More Powerful. It's a little screenshot. A Force More Powerful is a video game that while you're playing it, it teaches you how to engage in nonviolent insurrection and regime change. Here's another one. This is from a game called Food Force, which is a game that teaches children how to run a refugee camp. These things are all contributing in a very dynamic way to a huge rise in, especially in the developing world, in people's interest in and passion for democracy. We get so little news about the developing world that we often forget that there are literally millions of people out there struggling to change things to be fairer, freer, more democratic, less corrupt. And we don't hear those stories enough, but it's happening all over the place, and these tools are part of what's making it possible. Now, when you add all those things together, when you add together leapfrogging and new kinds of tools, second superpower stuff, et cetera, what do you get? Well, very quickly, you get a bright green future for the developing world. You get, for example, green power spread throughout the world. This is a building in Hyderabad, India. It's the greenest building in the world. You get grassroots solutions, things that work for people who have no capital or limited access. You get barefoot solar engineers carrying solar panels into the remote mountains. You get access to distance medicine. These are Indian nurses learning how to use PDAs to access databases that have information that they don't have access to at home in a distant manner. You get new tools for people in the developing world. These are LED lights that help the roughly billion people out there for whom nightfall means darkness to have a new means of operating. These are refrigerators that require no electricity. They're pot within a pot design. And you get water solutions. Water's one of the most pressing problems. Here's a design for harvesting rainwater that's super cheap and available to people in the developing world. Here's a design for distilling water using sunlight. Here's a fog catcher, which if you live in a moist jungle-like area will distill water from the air that's clean and drinkable. Here's a way of transporting water. Carrying water is such a drag. And somebody just came up with the idea of, well, what if you rolled it, right? That's a great design. This is a fabulous invention, Life Straw. Basically, you can suck any water through this and it will become drinkable by the time it hits your lips. So, people who are in desperate straits can get this. World-changing kinds of things ever. This is a merry-go-round invented by the company Roundabout, which pumps water as kids play. Yeah, seriously, give that one a hand. So, and the same thing is true for people who are in absolute crisis, right? We're expecting to have upwards of 200 million refugees by the year 2020 because of climate change and political instability. How do we help people like that? Well, there's all sorts of amazing new humanitarian designs that are being developed in collaborative ways all across the planet. Some of those designs include models for acting, and we have new tools. Does anyone know what this is? Exactly. This is a landmine detecting flower. If you are living in one of the places where the roughly 500 million unaccounted for mines are scattered, you can fling these seeds out into the field, and as they grow up, they will grow up around the mines, their roots will detect the chemicals in them, and where the flowers turn red, you don't step. Yeah, so seeds that could save your life, I also love it because it seems to me that the tools we use to change the world ought to be beautiful in themselves. That it's not just enough to survive. We've got to make something better than what we've got. And I think that we will. Just to wrap up, in the immortal words of H.G. Wells, I think that better things are on the way. I think that, in fact, all of the past is but a beginning of a beginning All that the human mind has accomplished is but the dream before the awakening. I hope that that turns out to be true. The people in this room have given me more confidence than ever that it will. Thank you very much. So I rather like this picture here. I particularly like the Ganesh in the background talking on the cell phone. I particularly like the little Linux penguin in the back. I just think that's a pretty cool picture. I just love this, you know. This is one of my favorite, it's pretty great. This is one of my absolute favorite things anywhere.